Good morning. I'm Jill Wengerter, Associate Professor of English for APUS, and I'm here as part of the third annual From Conference 2024 From Out of the Shadows. And I'm going to read my paper for you, Fierce with Reality, the Archetype of the Crone as the Antidote to Ageism and Invisibility. And I made this PowerPoint so you have something to look at while I'm reading. Any woman over the age of 50 will tell you about the invisibility factor. How, when we reach a certain age, women begin to feel unseen and as a result, made to feel irrelevant. This is ageism, which is the belief that a person's worth and abilities are diminished by chronological age. It's important to understand that aging is not the problem, ageism is. As Baba Cooper, author of Over the Hill, explains, with ageism, one is shaped into something that is always less than what one really is. In the beginning of his book, How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Seen, author David Brooks notes that Ralph Ellison's words at the start of Invisible Man still rank as one of the most profound expressions of what it is to not feel seen, heard, or understood. In this case, because of race. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me, the nameless narrator declares. It is as though I've been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see anything and everything except me. This is how many older women report feeling. Full disclosure, I'm 58 years old, and I defended my dissertation in literature and criticism 21 years ago at the age of 37 on the topic of representations of the crone in contemporary American literature. At the time, I really was just doing research, since the ageism and invisibility I was studying were not yet part of my own experience. The inspiration for my project was a woman 56 years my senior, my childhood next-door neighbor and friend, Mrs. Stanford, a self-described old bird from Britain who died 17 years ago at the age of 97. Fiercely independent, she was married, childless by choice, and a competitive homing pigeon flyer who had the distinction of being recognized in her 50s as the top woman pigeon flyer in the US. I was captivated by her from the day I first met her at the age of 4, and confounded when I started noticing how, as she approached her 70s and beyond, people started dismissing her, or worse, infantilizing her, talking down to her in a baby voice, or worse, yelling, assuming that she was hard of hearing, and addressing her as honey, sweetie, and dear. To me, this was the equivalent of talking down to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What an indignity. One she endured for the last 3 decades of her life. She told me that in her own mind, she never got any older than 40, and that it was just so odd that people didn't recognize she was the very same person she always was. I suspect we will all feel the same way. If this can happen to Peg Stanford, it can happen to anyone, you and I included. And no one wants to be dismissed, disregarded, and diminished like this. In understanding how women are made to feel invisible or visible, empowered or powerless, it's important to ask the questions, visible to whom and for what purpose? To find the answers, it's helpful to look to the triple goddess archetype, consisting of the maiden, the mother, and the crone, which harkens back to pre-Christian and pre-Hellenic times. Rather than being a model for biological determinism, each phase signals a spiritual and archetypal passage in a woman's life, with the crone being the culmination of a woman's entire life experience, one who grows not just old, but wise throughout the process. According to author Clarissa Pinkola Estes, you may remember her from the 80s from her classic book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. She's now writing about the crone. And she said that the cronehood phase officially starts at age 58. So how auspicious for me. The crone is the most powerful of the 3 persona, likened to the Hindu goddess Kali, the Hawaiian volcano goddess Pele, and the Irish goddess Morrigan. Thank you, Jackie. The great creators and destroyers, all of them. The crone represents the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And she's feared for her power in a way that her younger counterparts are not. For this reason, the archetype of the crone is the antidote to ageism and invisibility, we women experience to this day. Calling on the crone is an act of reviving this powerful archetype from a place of banishment. Demoted from her once revered position, the crone has been vehemently cast out from our culture as old women are trivialized and degraded. In fact, old age is a cultural taboo, a dreaded and undesirable state, particularly for women. It's as if old women had the bad taste to grow old, an indication of the deep cultural denial there is for this phase of life that we will all experience if we get the chance. And to be clear, ageism is a woman's issue, not to be absorbed and blurred by the word elderly. Women as they age endure the double burden of sexism and ageism. This despite, or perhaps because of the fact that women in the US outlive men by an average of 6 years. There are simply many more of us at this stage. Merodel Lesueur comments on how odd all of this is when you think of it. You never hear of anything in nature aging, or a sunflower saying, "Well, I'm growing old," and leaning over and vomiting. You know, it ripens, it drops its seed, and the cycle goes on. So I'm ripening. For aging, you can say ripening. Throughout history, regardless of the epoch or era, women have been valued more than anything for their role in sexuality and reproduction. The maiden represents youth and sexuality, and for this purpose, she is awarded the biggest spot in the limelight. In the past 2 decades, this visibility has been heightened exponentially through social media, with an increasing emphasis on image and materialism, and the ridiculous expectation that girls and women maintain a hypersexualized level of attractiveness. What are the implications of this kind of visibility that proffers girls as young as preteens as sexual objects? If the gaze is typically understood as male, is women's visibility dependent on or measured by men seeing us? And where does that objectification lead, if not reinforcing girls that their currency is always and already in sex, in their looks and sexuality, and ultimately priming them to be sexually available? And if that's the case, is this kind of visibility even desirable? To say nothing of the girls who fail to meet these impossible standards, the ones who remain in the shadows for any number of reasons. Aren't they too invisible? If the youth and sexuality of the maiden offers certain women of this phase attention and visibility, the mother, representing the most sacrosanct of all roles for women, commands attention with more than a modicum of social status and respect. In the US today, 86% of women have children by the end of their reproductive years. And studies show both that women spend more time with their children than men do, and that on the whole, they take a great deal of satisfaction in their role as mothers. In her book of Woman Born, Motherhood as Experience and Institution, first published in 1976, feminist author Adrienne Rich makes the distinction between the experience of something versus the institution of it, whether it be motherhood, religion and spirituality, marriage, education, etc. Most important of all, Rich says, is having the freedom to make a choice. Then one must navigate the cultural terrain of prescriptions laid out by the institution at hand. Today in 2024, society is still prescribing that a woman's crowning glory is in fulfilling her biological destiny through heterosexual marriage and motherhood above all else. So it is perhaps no coincidence that the current public and political arena is bubbling up with references to the childless cat ladies and postmenopausal women normally relegated to the margins with the crone. And here I have juxtaposed these images of the wave of cats that we've all been hearing about in this current presidential election, and the cave of cats that I learned about from my chair, Jackie Fowler, who was recently in Ireland and discovered, well, I think in a previous trip with LK Silva, discovered this cave of cats, which was made in honor of the crone goddess in Ireland, Morgan, also called the gateway to hell. And I find it so interesting that old women are likened to witches, and the familiar of witches has always been cats. So here we are. There's something to this, right? No coincidence here. So this current buzz, we all know, created by Republican vice presidential running mate J.D. Vance on the topic of child cat ladies and their miserable, unfulfilled lives reflects some pretty strong beliefs, not just about the institution of motherhood, but of womanhood. In a podcast from 2020, Vance criticizes what he calls the quote, hyper neoliberal model of working family, unquote, that relies on daycare and advocates instead for help from grandmothers. Pointing to his wife's mother, a biology professor in California who took a year long sabbatical to come and take care of their new baby so his wife could return to work, Vance agrees with a statement by the podcast host that, quote, the whole purpose of the postmenopausal female is to help raise grandchildren. No need to broach a discussion of social class and economic factors recognized in other developed nations on which government policy of paid maternity and family leave are based. As for the term postmenopausal female, let's not even. And it isn't only men who have something to say about this. Here, we'll go back to this image before we get to Margaret Mead. Another comment by Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders took aim at Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris for not having her own biological children. My kids keep me humble, she said, and added, unfortunately, Kamala, purposely mispronouncing her name, doesn't have anything keeping her humble. Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, quickly responded with a comment as if keeping women humble, whether having children or not, is something we should strive for. Kamala's response was spot on. She told an interviewer simply, I think it's really important for women to lift each other up. Yes. In defense of Kamala and all of the childless cat ladies, herself included, actress Tracy Ellis Ross at a live stream event hosted by Oprah Winfrey in September, after these comments have been made, has this to say in response. I want to say to people who think a woman's worth is measured by her baby count, I mean, shout out to all the amazing mothers, but the childless women have been mothering the world and elevating culture as aunties, godmothers, teachers, mentors, sisters, and friends, and the list goes on. And you do not need to push out a baby to help push humanity forward. This points to a deeper cultural belief about women and our usefulness to society. The young maiden is valued for her youth and sexuality, the mother for tending to the family and raising children, and the crone for being a helper at the nest. Those who thwart this are denounced as aberrant cat ladies or worse. But if anything, this debate has made an invisible demographic of society visible. Such women are large in numbers and no longer so easily intimidated or shamed. This is an important shift as cat ladies are the crones of tomorrow. The eco-philosopher and author Derek Jensen says that unquestioned beliefs are the real authorities of any culture. By examining the unexamined beliefs about women at every stage of our lives that shape so much of our experience, and by resisting such cultural conditioning, we can take our cue from the crone, who has survived it all and is there to show us the way forward. The title of this talk, Fierce with Reality, is offered in the spirit of a memoir written by Florida Scott Maxwell, The Measure of My Days, One Woman's Vivid Enduring Celebration of Life and Aging, first published in 1968, from which this phrase was borrowed. She writes, you need only claim the events of your life to make yourself yours. When you truly possess all you have been and done, which will take some time, you will be fierce with reality. Likewise, anthropologist Margaret Mead spoke of postmenopausal zest, which she said began for her in her late 50s. Until she died in 1979 at the age of 77, Mead's life was a testament to her belief that old age is a time for women to break new ground and to celebrate their wisdom and experience. She didn't use the word crone, but she was describing this final phase of life as women's ultimate experience. Working in the spirit of Scott Maxwell's Fierce Reality and Mead's Postmenopausal Zest is the Growing Old Disgracefully Network. Founded in 1989 and since disbanded, the organization began with a course by the same name held at a women's center known as Hen House in Lincolnshire, England. The group published a book in 1993 that went by the same title, which explains, we're using growing old disgracefully as a challenge to growing old gracefully, which implies that we are to be silent, invisible, compliant, and selflessly available to the needs of others. The crux of growing old disgracefully, the book explains, is this. You finally disentangle yourself from the identity and opinions of others and start being who you want to be. It's a choice to be made about claiming your power to live life on your own terms. As Gloria Steinem once said, the act of taking power is power itself. And no one better exemplifies this than the crone. All right, so back to Clarissa Pinkola Estes. As I mentioned, she was the author, let's see, oh, it was actually 1992, it was published, Women Who Run with the Wolves, Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman Archetype. She has a more recent podcast that came out called The Archetype of the Crone. In it, she explains that the word crone comes from a word meaning crown, establishing her authority as a leader. Like many terms used to describe older women, though, like witch and hag, which once meant wise woman and holy one, respectively, the term crone is today used as a term of offense. Because of this, few know the crone is actually the embodiment of wisdom, love, and justice, who shines her light into the world. One notable aspect of her ability to see far, much like a seer, is really worth noting. According to Estes, she represents the ability to see more than through the eyes, but through the heart and through a creative and animating force. In this way, the crone is a shapeshifter. Unconcerned with being visible to her culture, she has the power to make herself visible and invisible at will. And as such, is the antidote to ageism and invisibility familiar to women as they age, as we age. Of course, most know nothing of this powerful archetype, as our culture does not exactly champion the power of women, much less the power of old women. The crone is reviled in our culture. For one, because she is associated with death and represents the shadowy darkness of the unknown, but also, according to Estes, because she won't behave herself. She won't be silent, she won't stay put, and she will set others free. A very dangerous thing for our culture. Unquote. As the feminist philosopher Mary Daly asserts, the primary goal and result of ageism is to purify society of crones, that is, to prevent the becoming of wise old women. For this reason, the crone has long been dismissed and denounced as a hideous old hag and relegated to the darkest shadows, where she's made invisible. Or is she? To be clear, crones are no ordinary beings. As Estes emphasizes, the crone's knowing is ancient, and those most likely to realize it are the eccentrics. Normalcy, she says, is the enemy of your giftedness, your unique voice, your visionary status. Becoming a crone is a process of claiming your gifts and knowing your own truth. Whatever power we questioned or denied is within our right to reclaim, she says. Cronehood is essentially the process not just of getting old, but of becoming wise. When we come into our own, she says, quote, we cut our ropes, we move forward, no longer weighted down by cultural norms and expectations, end quote. But the crone doesn't keep her gift to herself. No. The purpose is to give it away, to light the way for her younger counterparts, and to lead them to freedom. The title of the 2012 documentary about Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Not for Ourselves Alone, plays on this idea, as does the statement by Irene Pauley, author of Some Ironies of Aging. She says, when we ask for a chance to live our old age in comfort, creativity, and usefulness, we ask it not for ourselves alone, but for you. We are not a special interest group. We are your roots. You are our continuity. What we gain is your inheritance. Continuity is the key, and there are many literary and cultural representations of this dynamic. One notable literary example I'd like to mention here is Practical Magic, the series of 4 books written by Alice Hoffman. First published under the same title of Practical Magic in 1995. You may be familiar, let me move this down, with the movie version of the book starring Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman, which came out in 1998. To be clear, this is very much the Hollywood rendition of Hoffman's story. Not that I'm complaining too much, as I've always been a big fan of these actresses. However, the film emphasizes very little of the actual power behind the magic that's integral to this story. The prequel, published 25 years later in 2020, Magic Lessons, traces the history of Gillian and Sally Owens to their forebear, Hannah Owens, who lived during the 1600s in the English countryside. Hannah was a crone in the true sense that she was gifted at the healing arts and the use of herbs. Such women come from a long tradition of healers, curanderas, and medicine women who possess deep knowledge of the earth and the medicinal uses of plants. They know, for example, how to treat common ailments, how to help women conceive and later deliver a baby, and they know what to do to prevent and terminate a pregnancy. As Virginia Woolf writes so eloquently in her short story, The Mark on the Wall, and what is knowledge? What are learned men save the descendants of witches and hermits who crouched in caves and in woods brewing herbs, interrogating shrew mice and writing down the language of the stars? I love that line. It was crucial, however, for such women to be covert and careful with this knowledge, as societal strictures forbade such practices then, as it does now. A simple countrywoman, quote, Hannah Owens, Hoffman writes, lived apart from the delusions and bad intentions of men, deep in the forest as possible, in a small cottage hidden by vines, until she was inevitably found and burned alive in her own house, her young adopted daughter Maria escaping into the forest with her life. Hannah's brutal murder was the result of what archaeologist Marija Gimbutas calls the greatest shame of the Christian church, also known as the Burning Times or the European witch craze that occurred approximately between 1560 and 1760 and continued on to Massachusetts as the Salem witch trials in the late 17th century. In a drastic effort to eradicate the wise women, prophetesses, and healers, the church, according to Cynthia Barstow, murdered by burning and hanging approximately 100,000 women in Europe, a disproportionate number of which were crones. This is important because it shows that through these heinous acts, the church succeeded in systematically eradicating the power of women, and specifically the power of old women. These witch hunts are archetypal for the various witch hunts that continue today. As Hoffman's magical series shows, however, Hannah's power does not die with her, but continues through her daughter Maria, who is later persecuted when she flees to, of all places, Salem, where she manages to escape death by hanging. The magical powers of the Owens women, magical power, is portrayed through the Owens sisters' two aunts, who figure prominently throughout the series, two old crones. They live in a quirky old house in Massachusetts where they offer healing tinctures and love potions to the neighbor women who line up at their door under the dark cover of night. The aunts also fulfill the crones' most important role of lighting the way for their nieces, who were orphaned as preteens and move in with the aunts after their parents die unexpectedly. As guardians, the aunts are anything but conventional, to say the least, and teach the girls how to accept and use their gifts, which is a process that takes most of their lives. Contemporary culture, for all its ageist messages, is full of examples of women lighting the way for their younger counterparts, from actors Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin in the hilarious series Grace and Frankie, to Julia Louis-Dreyfus's brilliant podcast Wiser Than Me, to many other celebrities who are embracing their age like a badge of honor. For example, Meryl Streep, Helen Mirren, Judi Dench, Jamie Lee Curtis, Sally Field, and perhaps most impressive of all, Carol Burnett, who at 91 is still acting. Women are challenging and changing the cultural narrative. Far from just passing for younger, women are fighting back and redefining what it means to be old and female. My favorite example is the artist Pink, who came to Madonna's defense amidst a plastic surgery backlash. And let me see if I can find this to play for you because it's so much better in her own words. It really is. All right, let's see. That's not progress. Not progress. And you're asking me what I think about Madonna's face. There you go. Let me pull my PowerPoint back up. Yeah. And this is happening more and more as women take the spotlight. Younger women like Taylor Swift and so many others constantly having to push back and just say, no, that's not appropriate. Why are you focused on, as always, my looks, my body, my outfit, my sexuality, my relationship, my pregnancy? Oh, yeah, that's always a favorite. Is she pregnant? Remember Jennifer Aniston for decades. Is she pregnant? Is she pregnant yet? Is she married? Is she married yet? Finally, women are starting to reframe the narrative, and it's so wonderful to see. It really is. Yes, and Pink is definitely an example of how to do it right? We should all feel inspired to follow her example, her lead. So it's stories like these that empower women and enable us to stand our ground like true crones. As Estes remind us, crones are shapeshifters. Invisibility, she says, is an act of will. If you want to be visible or invisible, you can be. No one can make you invisible. She goes on to say that, quote, feeling invisible to your culture is often a result of putting a lot of weight into what other people think, something crones have no interest in. The crone says, be as you are. The woman who's ready to accept that challenge, Ursula Le Guin asserts, must become pregnant with herself at last. She must bear herself, her third self, her old age. As we women meet the dark goddess within, we embark on a path of conscious awareness and awakening, enhanced rather than diminished by age, moving from the shadows and radiating a sacred light. Thank you. And I just wanted to end with this quote from Sylvia Plath because it's so powerful and exemplifies what we're talking about here today. I took a deep breath and listened to the old bray of my heart. I am, I am, I am. Thank you.